This seat is taken. Some tracks are best left unfollowed.
He sat down beside me on the 1407 from Milan to Vienna, a first-class compartment with 30 empty seats, looked at me with eyes the color of frozen rivers, and said, "You're my wife for the next 3 hours." He said it the way men like him say everything, like a fact. Like gravity, like the train would not dare to disagree. I took off my headphones. I closed my book. I was on chapter 14 of a novel about a woman who murders her husband with a frozen leg of lamb, which felt suddenly relevant. I looked at this man, this absurdly handsome, obviously dangerous, visibly terrified man who had just sat down beside a plus-size woman reading a murder novel and declared a marriage, and I said, "Then you're paying for my dinner, husband." His left eyebrow moved exactly 2 millimeters. It was the most restrained, almost smile I had ever witnessed, and in that micro-expression, in the fracture of control, in the 2-millimeter crack in the armor of a man who was clearly accustomed to being obeyed without question, I made a decision that would change my life. I decided to play along, but I need to take you back 20 minutes, because you need to understand who was sitting in seat 7A before a mafia boss sat down in 7B and rearranged her entire evening. My name is Daphne K. Aloha. I am 31 years old. I am Hawaiian Filipino, golden brown skin, thick, dark, curly hair that does whatever it wants, a round face with cheekbones that my mother calls the architecture of strong women, and a body that is plus size in the way that means I take up space beautifully and unapologetically, and the world has opinions about it that I stopped collecting when I was 23. I am also a travel writer, which means I am a woman who is paid, modestly, unpredictably, in the specific, precarious currency of freelance creative work, to sit on trains and in cafes and on the edges of foreign cities and turn what I observe into sentences that make other people want to be where I was. I am very good at it. Not because I am a better writer than anyone else, but because I am a plus-size woman traveling alone through a world designed for smaller bodies, and that perspective, the perspective of a woman who is simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, who is overlooked by waiters and over-examined by strangers, who is too big for airplane seats and not big enough for anyone's expectations, produces writing that lands differently. I was on the 1407 from Milan to Vienna because I was writing a piece about overnight trains for a travel magazine. The assignment paid 1,400 euros. I had spent the previous week eating gelato in Milan, riding ferries on Lake Como, and accumulating the specific, sun-warmed loneliness of a woman who is good at being alone and tired of being good at it. I bought the first-class ticket because the magazine was paying. I found compartment 7. I sat in seat A, the window seat, because a travel writer always takes the window. I opened my book. I put on my headphones. The train pulled out of Milano Centrale at 14:07, precisely on time, and I settled into the rhythm of the rails and the satisfaction of a novel in which the heroine commits a murder with a frozen lamb leg and gets away with it. For 20 minutes, the world was exactly as I expected it to be. Then a man sat down in seat 7B, and the world became someone else's story. I didn't know who he was then. I know now. Don Nikolai Voronov, 34. Head of the Voronov family, a Russian-Italian syndicate that operates across 7 European countries and specializes in the kind of business that involves shipping containers, offshore accounts, and the occasional disappearance of people who ask too many questions about shipping containers and offshore accounts. Nikolai had been in Milan for a meeting. The meeting had gone wrong. Not business wrong, survival wrong. A rival family, the Khazaris, a Sicilian operation that had been encroaching on Voronov territory for 18 months, had learned his location and dispatched 3 men to the train station. Not to negotiate, to end the conversation permanently. Nikolai's security detail had been compromised. His driver was dead. I learned this later, and I am telling you now because you need to understand the math of the moment. A man whose driver had been killed 40 minutes earlier, whose bodyguards had been intercepted, who had walked into Milano Centrale alone, unarmed. He had hidden his weapon in his luggage to avoid train security, and who was being followed by 3 men who intended to kill him before the train reached the Austrian border. He had approximately 3 hours. The border crossing at the Brenner Pass, where Austrian police presence would make an assassination operationally impractical, was 3 hours away. He needed to survive 3 hours on a moving train with 3 killers aboard. He needed a cover. A reason to be in a first-class compartment that would make the Khazari men hesitate. A single man traveling alone is a target. A man traveling with his wife is a complication, because killing a man in front of his wife creates a witness, and witnesses create problems that outlive the operation. He looked at the compartment. 30 empty seats, 1 occupied, by a plus-size woman in a rust sweater, reading a novel, wearing headphones, radiating the specific, self-contained energy of a person who is comfortable being alone and has no interest in being disturbed. I was the perfect cover. Not because I was inconspicuous. A plus-size, golden-brown woman in first class is never inconspicuous, as the 4 passengers who had already assessed my body on the way in could confirm. I was perfect because I was ordinary. A tourist, a reader, a woman whose presence in seat 7A said, "I am on vacation, I am minding my business, and the man beside me is my husband, and we are boring, and you should move along." He sat down. He looked at me with those frozen river eyes, and he said the words that started everything. "You're my wife for the next 3 hours. Then you're paying for my dinner, husband." The 2-millimeter eyebrow, the almost smile. And then, because he was a man trained to negotiate, and I was a woman trained to observe, we had the strangest conversation of my life. "I need you to understand," he said, his voice low, precise, accented, Russian underneath Italian, control layered over urgency, "that I am asking, not telling. You literally just told me I'm your wife. He stopped, recalibrated. I watched the recalibration happen in real time. A man who had never been challenged by a woman in a rust sweater, adjusting his approach mid-sentence. "I am in a situation. On this train, there are people who intend to harm me. If I am alone, I am vulnerable. If I am with my wife, if we appear to be a couple, the risk changes. The calculus shifts." "The calculus," I repeated. "Yes. You sat down next to a random woman on a train and opened with marriage because of calculus. You are not random." His eyes, gray, sharp, the eyes of a man who evaluates everything, held mine. "You are traveling alone, in first class, reading a book. You are composed. You are not easily frightened. I can tell because I sat down uninvited and said something absurd, and you responded with a dinner demand rather than a scream. And you are..." He paused. "Plus size?" I offered, because I have learned that when people pause before describing my body, they are searching for a word that won't offend me, and the search takes longer than the description deserves. "Beautiful," he said, "in a way that makes this compartment look like it was designed around you. But that is not relevant to the calculus. What is relevant is that you are the kind of woman who looks like she belongs in first class, who looks like she could be married to a man in a dark coat, and who, critically, does not look like a woman who would be involved in what is happening in the corridor of this train." I looked at him. I looked at his hands. They were steady, but the tendons were visible, the controlled tension of a man holding himself together through discipline. I looked at his eyes. Behind the gray, behind the authority, I saw it, the thing that made me stay. Fear, controlled, buried, locked in a vault behind the ice, but fear. This man was afraid, and he had sat down next to me not because I was convenient, but because he was out of options, and the last option was asking a stranger for help, which was, I understood instinctively, the hardest thing a man like this had ever done. 3 hours, I said. 3 hours. To the Austrian border. After that, you will never see me again. Rules, I said, because I am a woman who negotiates. Rule 1. You tell me enough of the truth that I can make an informed decision. I don't need the whole story. I need enough to know what I'm sitting next to. Fair. Rule 2. If anything happens, anything violent, anything dangerous, you put me first. Not the mission, not the calculus, me. Something changed in his face. Not the almost smile, something deeper, something structural. A shift in the way he was looking at me, as if he had expected a transaction and received a treaty. You have my word. Rule 3. You are, in fact, paying for dinner. The dining car on this train serves a 4-course menu, and I have been eating train station sandwiches for a week, and I am ready to be fed properly. The 2-millimeter eyebrow again. But this time, the corner of his mouth actually moved, not a full smile. But a start, the architectural foundation of one. Done, he said. Then for the next 3 hours, Dawn, whoever you are, I am your wife. What's my husband's name? Nikolai. I'm Daphne. Tell me how to hold your hand convincingly, because I've never fake held a mafia boss's hand before, and I want to get the grip right. He looked at me, this plus-size woman in a rust sweater who had just agreed to pretend marry a man being hunted through a train, and for 1 second, the ice in his eyes melted to something warmer. Something surprised, something that looked, if I'm being honest, like the beginning of gratitude. He took my hand. His fingers wrapped around mine, large, warm, careful. The grip of a man who holds things precisely because he understands what it costs to drop them. Like this, he said, and the 3 hours began. The first Khazari man walked past our compartment at 14:43, 36 minutes into the journey. I saw him through the compartment window, a man in a dark jacket, hard face, walking slowly through the first-class corridor, with the specific, scanning attention of someone looking for a particular person. His eyes swept each compartment window. Empty, empty, elderly couple, empty, and then compartment 7. He looked in. He saw a man and a woman sitting close together. The man's arm was along the back of the woman's seat. The woman was leaning toward him, talking, smiling. The body language of a couple, not passionate, not performative, but comfortable. The body language of people who have been married long enough that proximity is not a choice but a gravity. The Khazari man's eyes moved on. He walked past. Nikolai exhaled. It was the smallest exhale, a controlled release of tension that a normal person would not have noticed. But I noticed because his hand was holding mine, and I felt the micro-tremor in his fingers when the man appeared, and the micro-release when the man passed, and in that tremor, I understood something about Don Nikolai Voronov, that his enemies would kill to know. He was human. He's gone, I whispered. For now, there are 2 more. So we have to keep being married. Is that a hardship? Depends. What's your position on dessert? Because I have strong opinions about the chocolate torte listed on the dining car menu, and a fake husband who doesn't support my dessert choices is grounds for a fake divorce. The almost smile again, closer to real this time. The foundation was becoming a structure. We went to the dining car at 15:30, hour 1 and 23 minutes. He insisted. Not because of the cover, which was strengthened by a couple dining together, but because I had demanded dinner as a condition of the fake marriage, and Don Nikolai Voronov, I was learning, was a man who honored his terms with the same precision he applied to everything else. We sat at a 2-person table by the window. He ordered wine, a Barolo, which told me he understood Italian reds, which told me his empire had legitimate investments in the region, which told me that a man who chooses wine this carefully does nothing carelessly, including sitting beside a stranger on a train. I ordered the 4-course menu, all 4 courses. He watched me order without commentary, without the quick, assessing glance that men sometimes give when a plus-size woman orders generously, and I added that to the list of things I was noticing about him, a growing list, handwritten in the margins of my writer's brain. Tell me something true, I said, dipping bread into olive oil. Not dangerous, not classified, something true. He considered this the way he considered everything, with the focused, efficient attention of a man who does not waste words. "I play the piano," he said. "What kind?" "Chopin, mostly the nocturnes. The sad ones. All of Chopin is sad, that's the point." I laughed. He looked startled by the laugh, as if laughter was a sound that did not occur naturally in his environment, like birdsong in a bunker. "Your turn," he said. "I'm a travel writer. I'm on this train for an assignment. I was going to write about the dining car menu and the view from the Brenner Pass and the specific loneliness of overnight trains. And now? Now I'm going to write about the man who sat down next to me and said, 'You're my wife,' with the same energy as, 'Please pass the salt.' You can't write about this. Obviously I can't write about this, but I can write around it. I can write about a train ride where the view was secondary and the company was unexpected. I can write about a rust sweater and a dark coat and a dining car where two strangers pretended to be married, and somewhere between the Barolo and the chocolate torte forgot that they were pretending." The words landed before I could stop them. They landed between us on the white tablecloth like a dropped glass, sudden, irreversible, the truth spilling out in a way that couldn't be poured back. Nikolai looked at me, not the scanning, evaluating look of a man calculating cover, the look of a man who has been seen. "Are we?" he asked quietly. "Forgetting that we're pretending?" The train clacked over a junction. The wine trembled in the glasses. The rain drew lines down the window beside us. "I don't know," I said. "Ask me again in hour 3. Between hours 2 and 3, we stopped pretending. Not deliberately, not with a declaration or a decision. The pretending simply dissolved, the way sugar dissolves in warm water, gradually, inevitably, until the substance has changed and the original components are no longer separable. He told me about the piano, about his mother, a concert pianist from St. Petersburg who had married his father and spent 30 years in a world that had no room for nocturnes, and who had taught him Chopin in the evenings, in a room with a locked door, because the music was their secret, and secrets were the only private territory available to a Don's wife. "She died when I was 22, he said. "The piano was the last thing she gave me. I play it every night. My men think it's an eccentricity. It's a conversation. I am talking to her." I told him about my mother, about growing up plus-size and Hawaiian Filipino in a world that had very specific ideas about which bodies were allowed to travel, to take up space, to sit in first class and eat 4-course dinners, and be looked at with desire rather than assessment. I told him about the first time a man on a date said, "You'd be so pretty if you lost weight," and the last time, because there was a last time, because I decided at 23 that the world's opinion of my body was the world's problem, not mine, and I stopped collecting it. "You are," he said, "the most self-possessed woman I have ever met. I'm the most self-possessed woman most people have ever met. It comes from growing up in a body that the world has opinions about. You either crumble under the opinions, or you become so structurally sound that the opinions bounce off. I chose structural." "Structural," he repeated, and the word in his Russian-Italian accent sounded like the name of something beautiful. He told me about the empire, not the details. He kept his word about not making me complicit. But the weight of it, the loneliness of a man who can trust no one, who evaluates every interaction for threat, who has not had a conversation in years that wasn't a transaction. "Everyone who speaks to me wants something," he said. "A favor, a deal, protection, an alliance. You are the first person in, I don't know how long, who has spoken to me because you wanted to know about Chopin. And the chocolate torte," I added. "And the chocolate torte." I reached across the armrest and took his hand, not for cover, not because a Khazari operative was in the corridor, because his hand was right there, and he was right there, and the train was moving, and the rain was falling, and somewhere between Milan and the Brenner Pass, a plus-sized travel writer and a mafia don had stopped being strangers and started being something that didn't have a name yet, but deserved one. His fingers closed around mine. The grip was different now, not the precise, calculated hold of the first hour. This was the grip of a man holding something he was afraid to drop. Hour 2, 41 minutes. The Brenner Pass was 19 minutes away. The Austrian border, safety, jurisdiction, the end of the 3 hours, was close enough to count in heartbeats. The door of our compartment slid open. 3 men. The 3 Khazari operatives, the one who had walked past earlier, and 2 others. They had spent 3 hours searching the train, compartment by compartment, and they had done the math. The man they were looking for was not traveling alone. He was in compartment 7, with a wife. The first man stepped in. He looked at Nikolai. He looked at me. He looked at the space between us, my hand in his, my book on the seat, the coffee cups, the shared space of 2 people who were either married or something very close to it. Don Voronov, the first man said, "The Khazari family sends their regards." Nikolai stood up. He stood up in the narrow space of a first-class compartment, unfolding from the seat with the controlled, deliberate motion of a man who has done this before, who knows the exact dimensions of his body in a confined space, who understands that standing is a statement before it is a position. He moved between me and the door. He filled the doorway with his shoulders. He was unarmed. His weapon was in his luggage, 3 compartments away, inaccessible. He had hidden it to maintain the cover I had provided, the ordinary couple, the plus-size wife and the quiet husband, and now the cover was blown, and the weapon was gone, and the only thing between 3 armed men and the woman in seat 7A was a man standing in a doorway with nothing but his name. "My name is Nikolai Voronov," he said, and his voice was the voice I had heard order dinner and discuss Chopin, except now it was a weapon. The woman behind me is my wife. Not fake wife, not cover, not the woman I sat down next to 3 hours ago on a train. My wife? He said it with the same conviction that he had said it the first time, except the first time it was a lie, and now, 2 hours and 41 minutes later, it was the truest thing he had ever said. The Voronov family considers an insult to a wife the same as an insult to the bloodline, he continued. You know what that means. Your employers know what that means. Every family from St. Petersburg to Palermo knows what that means. The first Khazari man's hand was inside his jacket. The second was at his hip. The third was calculating. I could see the calculation on his face. The specific, real-time risk assessment of a man who had been sent to eliminate one target and was now confronting a scenario his employer had not briefed him for. You were sent to kill a man traveling alone, Nikolai said. I am not traveling alone. The woman behind me is Daphne Voronov. She is under the protection of my family. If you touch me, you create a widow, and widows of the Voronov bloodline are not mourned quietly. They are avenged generationally. Your children's children will feel the consequences. You need to decide, in the next 10 seconds, whether one kill is worth a war that will outlive everyone in this corridor. He counted. I know because I was counting with him. Silently, behind him, my hand gripping the seat back, my heart in my throat, counting the 10 seconds that stood between the dining car and the end of everything. At 7 seconds, the first man removed his hand from inside his jacket. At 9, the second stepped back. At 10, the third, the calculator, looked at Nikolai, looked past him at me, and made his decision. The Khazari family will be in touch, he said. I'm sure they will, Nikolai replied. Through the proper channels, not on a train, not in front of my wife. They left. The door slid closed. The train rocked over a junction, and the movement, the small, ordinary mechanical tremor of a train, doing what trains do, broke something in both of us. Nikolai turned. His face, the controlled, disciplined, ice-gray face of a dawn, was stripped, open, human. "Daphne," he said. Just my name, just the sound of it in his accent. The way he said it turned it into something new, a word that had existed my entire life but had never sounded like this, like it mattered, like it was the last word a man would choose to say if he only had one left. I was shaking. My whole body, my plus-size, beautiful, shaking body, was vibrating with the adrenaline of what had just happened. A man had stood in a doorway and called me his wife, and counted to 10, and the 10 seconds had held, and I was alive because a stranger on a train had decided, somewhere between the Barolo and the chocolate torte, that my life was worth a generational war. "You called me your wife," I said. "Yes. The real kind, not the 3-hour kind. Yes. We've known each other for 2 hours and 41 minutes. Some people know each other for decades and never stand in a doorway." I took his face in my hands, my plus-size, beautiful, shaking hands on his sharp, disciplined, beautiful face, and I kissed him in a first-class compartment somewhere between the Italian-Austrian border, while 3 men who had intended to kill him walked away from a door they could not pass because a woman was standing behind it. Not any woman. His wife, for 3 hours, for the rest of the ride, for however long we decided. The train crossed the Brenner Pass at 17:07, 3 hours and 0 minutes since Milan. Austrian police were visible on the platform, uniformed, routine, the bureaucratic machinery of a border crossing that made assassination operationally impractical. The Khazari men would disembark. Nikolai would be safe. The cover was no longer needed. The 3 hours were over. We sat in the compartment, my head on his shoulder, his arm around me, our hands intertwined in the way that had started as performance and ended as the most honest thing either of us had done in years, and we watched the Austrian mountains slide past the window, white-capped and ancient, and we did not let go. "The 3 hours are up," I said. "I know. Do you want your hand back?" "No." "Do you want me to stop being your wife?" "No." "Nikolai." I lifted my head from his shoulder and looked at him, at the gray eyes that had been frozen rivers 3 hours ago and were now something else, something warmer, something that looked like a man who had found the one person on earth who had seen him afraid and hadn't flinched. "I'm a travel writer from Honolulu. You're a Mafia don from, I assume, somewhere cold and Russian. This is insane. This is the most sane thing that has happened to me in my entire life," he said. "Everyone in my world speaks to me in calculations. You spoke to me in chocolate torte. You demanded dinner as a condition of saving my life. You held my hand on a train and I forgot, for the first time since I inherited this name, that I was afraid. You were afraid? I am always afraid. I just don't show it. You saw it. In the first 30 seconds, that's why I sat down. Not because you were cover, because you looked at me and you saw the fear and you decided to help anyway. No one has ever done that." He kissed my forehead. His lips were warm against my skin. The train rocked. The mountains watched. "Stay on the train," he said. "Vienna is 4 more hours. Have dinner with me again. The real kind, not the 3-hour kind. The forever kind? Let's start with dinner and see." We arrived in Vienna at 21:14. He carried my bag. I didn't ask him to. He simply picked it up as we stepped off the train, shifted it to his left hand so his right hand could hold mine, and walked me through the station as if he had been walking beside me for years instead of hours. On the platform, under the station lights, he stopped. He looked at me, the full look, the unguarded look, the look of a man who has removed every layer of armor and is standing in a train station with nothing between him and the world except a plus-size woman in a rust sweater. "I need to tell you something," he said, "that you're a dangerous man, and my life will be complicated if I stay? Yes, that your world is violent and unpredictable, and that being with you means accepting things that normal people don't accept? Yes, that the Khazari family will be in touch, and that probably doesn't mean a Christmas card. Definitely not a Christmas card. Nikolai." I put my hand on his chest. His heartbeat under my palm. Steady now. Steady for the first time since Milan. I am a plus-size Hawaiian-Filipino travel writer who agreed to fake marry a mafia boss on a train because he asked instead of ordered, and because the look in his eyes was the look of a man who was afraid and wouldn't admit it. I have eaten train station sandwiches in 11 countries. I have survived being underestimated by every waiter, border agent, and seatmate on this continent. I am structurally sound. Whatever comes next, I am structurally sound. He kissed me on a train platform in Vienna, while commuters flowed around us like water around a stone. And in that kiss was everything the 3 hours had built. The negotiation, the rules, the dining car, the Chopin, the chocolate torte, the corridor, the doorway, the 10 seconds, the border, and the hands that had held mine, first as cover, then as choice. "How long are you in Vienna?" he asked. "I was supposed to leave tomorrow. And now? Now I'm extending my stay. I have a new story to write, about a train ride where the view was secondary and the company was permanent." 6 months later, I published the article, not about the Mafia, not about the Khazari operatives or the doorway or the 10 seconds, about a train ride. On the 1407 from Milan to Vienna, a man sat down in the empty seat beside me, and the emptiness became the opposite of itself. There is a version of this story that is about danger, about the narrow corridors of European trains and the narrower corridors of powerful men's lives. But the story I want to tell is smaller and truer. On a train, in the rain, a man who had forgotten how to have a conversation that wasn't a transaction sat beside a woman who had forgotten how to have company that wasn't solitude, and for 3 hours they remembered. The article won a travel writing award. The judges commended the intimacy of the prose and the specificity of the longing. They did not know that the longing was for a real man, or that the man played Chopin nocturnes in the apartment where I now wrote, or that the 3 hours had become 6 months and counting. I am Daphne Kaaloha Voronov. I am 31. I am plus size. I am a travel writer who fell in love with a mafia don on a train because he sat down next to me and said, "You're my wife." And I said, "Then pay for my dinner," and neither of us ever really stopped being married after that. He plays Chopin in the evenings. I write at the desk by the window. The rust sweater hangs on the chair between us. A relic, a souvenir, the garment I was wearing when a man chose the seat beside me, and the seat became a home. 3 hours. That's all it took. 3 hours on a train in the rain, and a man who was afraid sat down next to a woman who was brave, and the fear became something else entirely. So here's your question. A man sits down beside you on a train. He says, "You're my wife for the next 3 hours." He is clearly dangerous. He is clearly afraid. He is clearly asking, not ordering. Even though he said it like an order, his eyes are saying, "Please." Do you give him 3 hours? Play the part, get the dinner, survive the ride, say goodbye at the border, and keep the memory like a book you read once on a train? Or forever? Hold the hand that was offered as cover and decide that it fits, that the grip is right, that a man who stands in a doorway and calls you his wife and counts to 10 deserves more than 3 hours? I chose forever. I chose it somewhere between the Barolo and the chocolate torte, and I've never looked back. Though I look out train windows constantly because I'm a travel writer, and the view is always better when someone is holding your hand. Drop your answer below. I read every one. And if you've ever sat next to a stranger and known, in the first 30 seconds, in the first 2 millimeter eyebrow raise, in the first "tell me something true," that the stranger was about to become the story, tell me, I want to read it. And one more thing, if Daphne's train ride moved you tonight, help this story reach the next person who needs it. On your YouTube app, there's a hype button right below this video. Tap it. 3 free points every week, and push this story towards someone who might be sitting alone on their own train right now, headphones on, book open, waiting for the seat beside them to fill. Think of it as buying a ticket. The train is already moving.